Hello, everybody. I'm sorry it took me so long to get some new stuff out, but I just dealt with a suspension due to my stream about Ukraine. It's a conversation for another time, so we're just going to get right into what this one's about. With the recent controversy based on trans athletes in sports coming up again, I decided it was time to do another episode of Taking Words Back. This is my series wherein I go into words that are basically being warped by the woke movement and stretched to mean things that they don't actually mean. And I'm going to use the Queer Dictionary for the definition of the term we're going to discuss today, which is transphobia. The reason this is necessary is because the trans activist movements have kind of wanted to make transphobia into this blanket concept that more or less amounts to transphobia equals disagreeing publicly with a trans activist on issues regarding trans lives. So, let's get into it. So, according to the Queer Dictionary, the term transphobia is a strong dislike, hatred, sense of disgust, or fear related to trans people. It is observed in both conservative and anti-LGBTQ+ circles, and in some self-identified progressive communities, such as the trans-exclusionary radical feminist TERF movement. Transphobic beliefs and practices are a source of anxiety, violence, and systemic discrimination against transgender people. Transphobia intersects significantly with other forms of hatred and discrimination, including homophobia and misogyny, and may take the form of transmisogyny. The word transphobia is related to, but distinct from, cissexism, although there is some overlap, and some people use the terms interchangeably. Whereas sexism is a belief that cisgender people are superior, transphobia is a hatred for people who are not cisgender. First used in the 1990s, the word transphobia is a portmanteau, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, comprised of trans meaning across from and referring to trans identities and phobia, meaning fear of. However, like the related terms homophobia and xenophobia, the words do not necessarily refer to a phobia in the psychological sense, as an intense fear. It can also refer to disgust and hatred that do not accompany conscious feelings of anxiety. So, let's go back to the main concept. Transphobia is a strong dislike, hatred, sense of disgust, or fear related to trans people. So, with that out of the way, let's take a moment and discuss this concept and contrast it to the way that it's being twisted. Transphobia is a strong dislike, hatred, sense of disgust, or fear related to trans people. It is entirely possible for somebody not to dislike trans people, hate them, be disgusted by them, or have any fear of them, and not necessarily agree with other trans activists about different aspects of how trans lives should be integrated, with the rest of society. This is kind of a relatively new thing in the history of the world, and inevitably that means that these concepts will have to be worked out, particularly when it comes with, how the trans person interacts with the rest of the gender that they have identified as. The reality is, as I discussed in my series about trans athletes in sports, and as the trans people who came forward in support of my series on this topic, there are still going to be biological differences for most trans people. And those differences will lead to a different problem, which is that it could create a situation of unfairness for cisgendered women who are still fighting for their place in the sports world. That fight's not over. So, I don't understand why anyone would suggest that having reservations about how we will incorporate the lives of trans people into women's sports when necessary, I don't understand how people believe that automatically, even just asking the question or bringing up the science, that's the thing. They'll even call the science itself transphobic, is therefore having a strong dislike, hatred, or sense of disgust or fear of trans people. It's not. This is where the problem lies. They want transphobia to mean pretty much anything they want it to mean in a given moment. Just like most of the rest of the aspects of how the woke movement conducts itself, it's like an inquisition or a witch hunt. And just like during the inquisitions of old, you can redefine what being a servant of the devil means at any moment to suit your purposes. Just so long as you ensure that the witch is always guilty, who cares? Rationality, logic, none of that's necessary. Just get the bad guys. And who are the bad guys? Well, anybody who's not us. Anybody that you've singled out. So, anyway.
So, there's legislation in various states to ban biological boys who are trans from playing girls' sports in school. What's your opinion on that?
This is a question of fairness. That's why I oppose biological boys who are trans competing in girls' sports in school. It just isn't fair. And we have to protect girls' sports in our school.
So are we to believe then that Caitlyn Jenner is transphobic? Caitlyn Jenner, one of the first high-profile trans people to come out, is somehow transphobic? Does Caitlyn Jenner have a strong dislike, hatred, sense of disgust, or fear related to trans people? Obviously not. That's just ridiculous. But I think, going back on this, which is one of the reasons I did that video, and we'll go over a little bit more of it, what I found even more alarming was some of the things that the trans activists said about Caitlyn Jenner that were somehow not transphobic. Because why? Well, just like racism can kind of just be twisted around to, only apply to one group of people and not others, apparently you can be utterly nasty to a trans person in all of the ways that trans activists don't want you to be, as long as that trans person happens to be on the list of enemies. So, for example, can you imagine somebody saying to a trans person that they might be trans on the outside, but all overprivileged white man on the inside? This is telling a trans person that they're still a man inside. This was literally done by a trans activist against Caitlyn Jenner. How is this not transphobia by their understanding of the word? How does this not get you canceled? Literally telling a trans person that they are still their biological gender on the inside. Or if you're wealthy, you're somehow less trans. The real trans people are poor. Like, what the fuck? I'm just going to go ahead and let the original video play a bit here. In reply to that, Rosemary Golden said, and she looked like a man. Somebody named Jason O'Neill said, Rosemary Golden, say that about any other trans person and what would be the reaction? Why is it okay to be transphobic and misogynistic when somebody doesn't agree with you? Your performative pseudo-moralist grandstanding is as pathetic as it is disgusting. You should be ashamed. To, of course, the reaction of laugh likes on all of this. But, and then Rosemary says, hey, I love trans folk, just not Jenner. It's mind-blowing to me that trans activists can just simply become totally transphobic if they don't agree with a trans person. If you said this, like anywhere else, they'd want you canceled. They'd want you fired from your job. Look how popular this one was. Yet another mockery of the system. Caitlyn's doctor forgot to remove her male privilege. So apparently you can be trans and retain your male privilege. Again, this one here, somebody made a very interesting observation, an observation that I would share with them. Mike Carlson says, I love how he was a hero when he transitioned, and the left loved him. He even got Woman of the Year. But now he has a difference of opinion, so now he's an outcast monster. Cancel culture? And then Jez says, Mike Carlson, the left never liked her. That's what you've made up in your mind. And then somebody said, Paul Goins says, the left loved her. They named her Woman of the Year at the ESPYs, for God's sake. And then, in reply again to the idea that the left never liked her, they ironically put up a picture of George Takei saying, "Welcome to the party, Caitlyn Jenner. You're stunning inside and out." So yes, the left did like her. So I snatched this one off of Twitter. Jody O'Connell, "You know what? I used to think you were a real woman, and I admired you for living your truth. Now I think you need to give up the pretense. You are really a monster, hiding in that human suit." So she's not a real woman because she disagreed with them on this topic. I don't know about you, but those trans folks, and trans activists, sure seemed like they had a strong dislike, hatred, or sense of disgust or fear related to Caitlyn Jenner. How is it that you can get away with that? I also saw people dead naming her, calling her Bruce. Again, so it's not transphobic to behave as a transphobe to anybody who you happen to disagree with on trans issues? How do you square that exactly? So this is another one of the reasons why when they throw this word around, they need to just spit out the truth, the quiet part that they want to say out loud, which is what they really want transphobia to mean is anybody who does not obey us when we take a stance on a given issue. It's the same reason why they tell black people that, say perhaps don't want to abolish the police, that they have internalized racism, or they tell, some women that they have internalized misogyny. They need to have a way to make it so that they're still free to be as bigoted and nasty as they want to be to anybody who does not obey. That's what this is about. It's about having religious power over others. You will obey, our thought, and basically do not commit any of our thought crimes that we have listed, or you're just as bad as everyone else. It was just completely vicious to me that they would say things like, "There's still a man inside." But remember, what is this about? This is about Caitlyn Jenner supposedly being transphobic, so the answer to that would be to dead name her and say things like that. Absolutely ridiculous. I was going to go back to a video that I had done before where one of my trans fans commented, because there was a debate that broke out on Facebook about these videos, and they happened to be a trans woman, and they had been in the military, and they were, just a big human being, and they explained to the people on the forum that even as a trans woman, they could still get out their rucksack and do all the things that they did in the military as far as hiking, that they were still way stronger than the women around them. And they literally attacked that trans woman and kicked her out of their group. And, those are decisions frequently made by people who are not even trans. So you could be transphobic, and do, again, anything you want to any trans person who's not following along with this bullshit. So to sum this up, the definition of transphobia is clear, and it does not include publicly disagreeing with activists. That doesn't make you transphobic. A study demonstrating the science that does in fact show that trans female athletes, even after 2 years of testosterone exposure, retain their 12% overall performance advantage and only lose a insignificant 5% of overall muscle mass. That's not a transphobic statement. You can say that without having a strong dislike, hatred, sense of disgust, or fear related to trans people. You don't have to hate anybody, or be disgusted by them or fear them to make a basic scientific statement. Nor do you need to hate them to think it would be unfair if they were still competing in women's spaces that were set aside for women by feminist activists who came before, who are still not even done with their fight. You can still feel that that's unfair and not hate, dislike, whatever trans people. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Period. So think about this when you start throwing this word around, because there are plenty of people who are probably allies to trans people in everything else. It doesn't make them transphobic. It just doesn't. It means that they disagree with you on some aspects of how trans lives should be incorporated into society. It's that simple. And I've explained that to people more than once. I'll call them any name they want, any pronoun they want. If somebody was to try to hurt a trans person, I would beat the shit out of them. You know, like if they're just trying to hurt them for just being trans. I'd never be okay with that. But because of the fact I don't agree on this one issue, I'm now just as bad as someone who would engage in such violence. That just doesn't... There's this whole George Bush, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists thing going on. And I don't buy it. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe and ring the bell. You can go to my website, v-radio.us, where you can find my other mediums, including Odyssey, BitChute, Getter, etc. Just different places where you can find my stuff. You can also find my social media, for instance, my Discord, Telegram channels, etc. Because YouTube is doing a great job of making sure that people don't always get notified of my work. If you would like to support me, you may do so on Patreon or PayPal. I'm actually doing pretty rough financially right now, which is one of the reasons why I was busy trying to put some things together. But if you'd like to do that, that would be great. And thanks for tuning in. There will be more content. In fact, I'm going to start working on another video right now. And I'm looking into doing some streams. Johnny Walker Dread has been asking me to do a stream. We're going to do one about the Jussie Smollett thing. And I know that happened a little while ago, but there was some stuff I wanted to say about it, and I couldn't because I was too busy being censored by YouTube. Thanks again.